Hey everybody, welcome to another virtual CrossWalk worship service. I hope this finds you well. I hope you're having a good June so far, midway through June now, if you can believe it. We're still here in COVID-19 world, and that's still impacting what it means for us to be church. We will let you know as soon as we can when we hope to resume, and we have some hopes that it'll be sooner than later. We anticipate that it'll be very different when we do finally come together, and that we've already learned that many of you, even though we may put every precaution in place, still are not comfortable, which is totally fine. We don't want to rush anybody back, but we also know that some people are just dying to get back together, and we're working on it, and we'll let you know as soon as we can when we make that decision. So anyway, we hold tight until then. Today is our final teaching day from Richard Rohr, and he'll be talking about moralism and mysticism today, which is really a great teaching. The title grabs me already, and during the meditation I'll talk about the complexities of what he's going to be getting in to prepare us for that. But for now, got some updates from Dar, got a couple tunes that I think you're going to enjoy. I'll give you a meditation, and then Richard Rohr. So we'll see you in just a few minutes.
Happy Sunday, CrossWalk. Thanks for choosing to come along and enjoy service with us today. A couple great things going on I want to share with you. I'm not sure if you're aware, but our pastor, Pastor Pete, is turning 50 years old. And what do you do when your birthday lands during quarantine? You party by yourself with SpongeBob SquarePants. If you look at his hat, that's what he's got. So this picture was actually taken a couple years ago with him. So yeah, he is turning 50, believe it or not. I know he will tell you he only looks 40, but you know, we all know. And then his birthday is on Thursday, June 18th. And so because we can't be together, we decided it was a great way to celebrate his birthday with giving him notes or gifts with love, encouragement, and shared memories. And I just want you to know, if you're going to bring him a card, he likes the really funny ones more than he likes the serious ones. So lots of ideas online of things you can do for someone's 50th birthday. So just want to encourage you to be creative and bring them in here to the church and drop them off, and we will get them all to him before his birthday so that he can see the love and feel the love and the encouragement. So just want to remind you about that. And then also on Wednesdays, we have a group called Virtually Together at 12 noon and 7 p.m. So if you would like to be part of this, we ask you to email us at info@crosswalknapa.org, and we will send you an invite. There's things that go on in Zoom that aren't intended to go on in Zoom, and so we tried to discourage that from happening. So we actually have to send you a link for you to any of our groups that we do online. Right now they're doing a series called Embracing a Life of Meaning, so if you would like to be part of that, just drop us an email and we'll get you the invite for that. And then men, I wanted to remind you that we're doing virtually men's breakfast at CrossWalk on Saturday, June 20th, so grab your cup of coffee or grab your breakfast, sign on to Zoom and hang out with the guys and do what guys do, talk a lot. Anyway, and then another one I want to remind you about is the dinner group that we do. We have decided to do the dinner group twice a month during quarantine. People just thought it was a good way to get together and be connected. So Monday, June 22nd will be the next virtual dinner group together, so join us for that. And then I wanted to tell you that Operation With Love from Home has had to replan their whole sending the packages to the troops. So this is a list of the most needed top 7 items that they need. So monetary donations for the postage, $9,000 to ship 600 packages. So if you're willing and able to help with that, that would be awesome. They're also looking for eye drops, razors, deodorant, handwritten thank you cards for our troops. They can be, if you have kids at home, this would be a really good project to give them. Also handy wipes, the travel size, and Beanie Babies. I know many of you were collecting Beanie Babies back in the day because we were told someday they were going to be worth a lot of money because they were limited editions, and now we found out that they're really not. Anyway, if you have some of these sitting around, you can drop them off at the church, any of these items, off at the church by June 19th, and we will get them to Operation with Love from Home. The office hours here at the church are Monday through Friday from 9 to 4. If I'm busy in my office, there'll be a table outside in the lobby that you can set items on. I have a lot of Zoom meetings that I'm involved with community organizations active in disaster. So sometimes I'm on a call and maybe even leading the call, so it's hard for me to get away. So just wanted to let you know, if you bring something by and I'm busy, you can drop it off at that table out there, and we'll make sure to get it either for Pastor Pete's birthday or Operation with Love from Home, or any of the other items that we've been talking about that they've been collecting for the Emergency Volunteer Center. That it has officially closed the doors here, but we're still taking donations here, and then we'll get them out to where there is a need. So just want to remind you about that, and just want to thank you all for your support, your prayer support, your financial support. Just keeping us all in your prayers really helps us try to figure out when's the best time to open the doors here at CrossWalk, not just for church, but also for support group meetings. Right now it's just not safe, so we've decided not to do it during this time. But I just want to, let you know, even though you're keeping us in your prayers, we're keeping you in our prayers as well. So thank you so much for doing what you do. Be patient and know that this will end soon. Thanks so much, and have an awesome week.
Shower down your presence, we respond to your great love. We won't be satisfied with anything ordinary. We won't be satisfied at all. We won't be satisfied with anything ordinary. We won't be satisfied at all. Open up the sky, fall down like rain. We don't want blessings, we want you. Open up the sky, fall down like fire. We don't want anything but you. Our beloved Jesus, we just want to see you in the glory of your light. Earthly things don't matter, they just fade and shatter when we're touched by love divine. We won't be satisfied with anything ordinary. We won't be satisfied at all. We won't be satisfied with anything ordinary. We won't be satisfied at all. Open up the sky, fall down like rain. We don't want blessings, we want you. Open up the sky, fall down like fire. We don't want anything but you. Let's go to the throne, the place we belong, right into his arms. Let's go to the throne, the place we belong, right into his arms. We won't be satisfied with anything ordinary. We won't be satisfied at all. We won't be satisfied with anything ordinary. We won't be satisfied at all. Open up the sky, fall down like rain. We don't want blessings, we want you. Open up the sky, fall down like fire. We don't want anything but you.
If you've talked to many people who no longer attend church when they once did, one of the reasons why people say they no longer attend church and don't want much to do with it is the judgmentalism that they experience from the church, either directly in their own lives or at large. The impression is that the church is against more things than it seems to be for. And that's really tragic. And unfortunately, there's a part of that that really is true because it's part of human nature. Part of our desire to control things means that we judge things, good or bad, of God or not of God, and that leaves most people out. And so we're going to talk in Richard Rohr's thing today about moralism versus mysticism. And there's a great story from Jesus' life that could be a conglomeration of stories all wrapped into one from John's Gospel in the 8th chapter. It's one that many people are familiar with, especially you crosswalkers, because we've talked about it a lot. It's one of our favorites because of what it communicates about God's grace and love. It's a story about a woman who was caught in adultery, thrown in front of Jesus, and then Jesus was asked what to do with her. And the religious leaders who threw her before Jesus while he was mid-sentence teaching, they said, well, the law tells us we should stone such women. What do you think we should do? They thought they had checkmate on this Jesus who seemed to have such wisdom. What they didn't realize is that they just checkmated themselves. Jesus, no doubt ticked off, stoops down, scribbles in the sand, probably calming himself a little bit, says to the crowd, "You who are sinless among you, cast the first stone." Goes back to scribbling a little bit, one by one, beginning with the older people in the crowd, and then finally to the younger. They all walked away. And it's only Jesus and the woman left. And Jesus simply looks up at her and says, "Has no one condemned you?" And she says, "No one, sir." And he says, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and leave your life of sin." Now, the reason why this was a checkmate on the religious leaders that day is because they were left with a real conundrum here. They had just used this woman as a pawn for their own game with Jesus. They didn't care about the woman at all. They didn't care about the humiliation she was going through. They also didn't care about the letter of the law because they missed the letter of the law. They didn't have both parties present when this accusation was made. They only had her, who they caught in the act, which means they also caught the other guy in the act, but conveniently he got away. Many scholars believe this whole thing was a setup, including her being caught in adultery, because she was known to be a prostitute, which she certainly did not choose to be as a little girl, and most likely, she found herself having to be in this role of no choice of her own, but of necessity. And so Jesus, seeing the moralistic game that's being played on her, with her life on the line, it ticked him off. And his statement about, you who are sinless among you, cast the first stone, is evidence of that. So Jesus turns it around and with very few words makes his point. This woman had an experience of God that day. She left with her life, and she left with a taste of grace in her mouth. It could have been a very different day for her. When Jesus says, "Go and leave your life of sin," in a lot of church circles, they use this story for other sins that they want to point out. And they talk about, well, if they just stop sinning, then it would be okay. And they totally miss this point. Because as soon as we get back into that mode of, well, you're forgiven as long as you leave your life of sin, when that becomes our mode, we just slipped into moralism all over again. And we missed the whole point of grace. God doesn't need to be a judge. God doesn't need to whip us into shape, because trying to law us or legalize us into right living, it just doesn't really ever work. It might for the short term, but threat just doesn't work for the long haul. Enter Jesus, who chooses to lead by grace, by the love of God, allowing the love of God to change people from the inside out. It's there you get lasting change. And it's there that we see this woman reborn to a new day of hope. And I hope you realize that that's the case for you too. You may have been in some pretty rough roads and made some tough choices in your past, and my hunch is that while there may be other people in your life that remind you of your poor choice or choices in your life, I bet you remind yourself more. And I want to let you know that God's not behind that. God wants your freedom. God wants you to live. God wants you to stop judging yourself. Embrace the love that is inherently yours because you're alive and God is with you. And allow that to sink in and allow that to take you to new places that do not lead you into more of the self-destructive behaviors that you don't want, but might actually lead you to life and life everlasting. There's real hope in that. It's changed my life, and I hope it changes yours too. Again and again and again. So let's have a brief moment of meditation today. So sit comfortably and close your eyes, breathe deeply, check in with your body, with your emotional state, your mental state. Just take a moment to center, then I got a couple words for you. So I want you to think about how you've judged yourself. And I wonder if there's something right now that you're judging yourself about. Can you identify that in your life? Maybe it's about a poor decision. Maybe it's about some flaw you think you can't overcome or whatever. Some shortcoming, a mistake. Could be something you did this week. Could be something 20 years ago. I don't know. But I bet there's something there, because it sure seems to me like everybody's pretty harsh on themselves. So what is it that you're judging yourself about? I invite you to imagine yourself in that position where the sinful woman found herself, where she was surrounded by her peers in her shame, with this identifier on her back, the tears rolling down her face. And I want you to picture yourself there, and I want you to think about the things you tell yourself to be ashamed of as being present for everybody right there. You're humiliated. Everybody knows you're junk. You just want this whole thing to be over. And now I invite you to look into the faces in the crowd. Maybe in the crowd you see some familiar faces of people who've accused you. Maybe you look into the faces in the crowd and you see your own reflection. Maybe it's your face 100 times in the crowd. All there to judge you. Now I invite you to imagine Jesus being given the case to judge or not judge. And when he's given this case, given this choice of what do you want to do with this person, we're talking about you now, his face turns to frustration. He takes a knee because he's not going to allow this injustice on you to continue. He speaks truth. Let those who are sinless among you cast the first stone, knowing that everybody has their hands dirty, and no one has a right to judge anyone else, including yourself. Slowly, the crowd thins. And if you're paying attention and hearing the words of Jesus, even those people that look like you in the crowd disperse. And it's just you and Jesus. And you find out that when grace speaks, judgment leaves. And you're just there with love, You're just there with grace, saying, neither do I condemn you. Go now and live. So I hope you'll take that advice today. I hope as we end our time of meditation that you really will believe that you are that loved, you're that worthy, that there's no point in the judgment anymore. It is of no value to you, because grace is what will lead you to life. So may you trust that as we go forward. Amen.
The Spirit was moving over the waters. Spirit, come move over us. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. The Spirit was moving over the waters. Spirit, come move over us. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. Come down. Spirit, when you move, you make my heart pound. When you fill the room, come rest on us. Come rest on us. Fire and wind, would you do it again? Open up the gates, let heaven come in. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. It's what we love about you, is that there's always more. It's what we love about you, is that there's always more. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. Come down. Spirit, when you move, you make my heart pound. When you fill the room, come rest on us. Come rest on us. Fire and wind, would you do it again? Open up the gates, let heaven rush in. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. It's what we love about you, is that there's always more. It's what we love about you, is that there's always more. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. The Spirit was moving over the waters. Spirit, come move over us. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. Come down. Spirit, when you move, you make my heart pound. When you fill the room, come rest on us. Come rest on us. Fire and wind, would you do it again? Open up the gates, let heaven rush in. Come rest on us. Come rest on us. It's what we love about you, is that there's always more. Is what we love about you, is that there's always more. Come rest on us. Come rest on us.
One thing I became aware of the longer I worked in ministry was that people who are initially attracted to religion are people who like social order. And they think God came to earth to be a policeman. That's the point of religion. In fact, very often you'll hear people say, well, what can you do in your religion? Oh, we can't eat meat on Friday, or we have to go to church on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, whichever one it is. And that's the big question. What can you do? What can you not do? Now, this isn't orthopraxy anymore. It's a kind of behaviorism that you define yourself by a certain moral stance. Now, I think that's understandable as a starting place, because the ego needs ego boundaries and identity. So it's what I'd call the task of the first half of life, the creating of your container. And you do that by and large by, we do this, we don't do that. So if you stay in first half of life religion, most people stay at the behavioral level, what I call here the moralistic level. It's all moral concerns. Now, if you look at the real trajectory of the scriptures, especially fulfilled in Jesus, the mystics and saints we've produced since then, you see that they finally recognize the goal of religion is not a perfect moral stance. It's union with God. Right? Not perfection is not the goal. That gets you back to individualism. Do you see? As if the individual could be perfect. Appeals to the ego, however. So the real goal is union. And surprise of surprises, I know this sounds like heresy, but it's so biblical that I can prove it by 1,000 texts. The way you come to union with God, if I'm to believe the biblical characters, is much more by doing it wrong than by doing it right. It's the immoral minority that gets it, not the so-called moral majority, which become scribes, Pharisees, teachers of the law, the group that Jesus always lists in 4 different categories, as those who are going to kill him. Those who have made religion and made the heads of religion policemen. And our job is to ferret out sinners and to be involved in sin management. Our job is to negotiate how we can handle your sin and get you to make amends for your sin. And it never gets on to the positive. It never gets on to the unitive. It never gets on to love, to be perfectly honest. Moralism is normally not a concern for love. It isn't. It's a concern about creating an ego identity that feels I'm on moral high ground because I have not had an abortion. You're on moral low ground because you have had an abortion. This gives the ego just great comfort. I'm not making a statement about abortion here. I'm making a statement about how we use moral stances for rather self-centered purposes. I call it ugly morality. It can be absolutely moral. We see Jesus exposing this in the publican and the Pharisee story perfectly. In the prodigal son story, perfectly. Simon, the Pharisee, and the woman who was a sinner, it's always the same story. One who is totally wrong, and in Jesus' eyes is revealed as right, and one who is totally right by the law, and in Jesus' eyes is totally wrong. It's so evident. It's just you have to say it's culpable that we missed the point. Because the ego can't see the point. The soul can read that. The ego can't. And if you're still at the ego level of development, morality is a way for you to up your moral capital. Do you understand? To feel I am holier than thou. Now, what undoes it in a moment? Moralism. Now, moralism is a negative term for me, using morality in an ugly way, even though it's formally moral. Is a moment of unitive consciousness, a moment of grace, a moment of unearned love, a moment of forgiveness, a moment of unmerited consolation. Use whatever word you want, but that's the only thing that breaks down the quid pro quo world of morality. Now, again, as you can tell, Paul is one of my heroes. Paul gets this. You might have your arguments with Paul on other levels. because he slips into moralism now and then. I would say he was having a bad day that day. But I can more than forgive Paul for his flights of mysticism. They undo his little moralistic paragraphs. That, what do the people in recovery say? Hungry, angry, lonely, tired, halt, Well, Paul had halt days too, where he gets very moralistic. But that isn't Paul. You take the whole corpus of Paul. It's 90% mystical, right? And people get so upset on his bad days where he descends into moralism. But I want to say we all do. We all do. When you're hungry, angry, lonely, and tired, you will find something to pick about, something to assert your superiority over your wife, over your husband, over your children, over yourself. It's amazing how the ego wants to play that game. But, you take Romans and Galatians. They are an absolute tour de force against legalism and law and moralism. They really are. Cursed be the law. He says, my God, if I said that as a Catholic, Can you imagine the letters to the bishop? I'm reading a book recently, and I had 4 years of philosophy, but I'm not a natural philosophical thinker. But there's an author comparing Paul to the postmodern philosopher Jacques Derrida. And I said, what? He says, here's the genius of it. He says, Paul is revealing what Derrida is saying, that all these constructs to create order in the world are in fact doomed to failure. Law will not create failure. Greek logic will not create order. Greek logic will not create order. Paul's key for creating order in the universe is by introducing disorder at its center, and that's what he means by the mystery of the cross. It's just genius. Genius. That the mystery of the cross, the only ordered world is your ability to deal with disorder. Failure. Who of us haven't had to do it? That there's a fly in every ointment. Every one of your children, as much as you love them, is going to have some faults. Your marriage is never 100% perfect. America is not perfect. The churches aren't perfect. That's, for Paul, the mystery of the cross. But see, the postmodern philosopher, he gets angry at this disorder in the universe and says there is no order. Do you understand? It's complete throwing out of all morality. He believes Paul introduced a new order, which is recognizing, honoring, and using for good purpose disorder. And that's why we are saved by the cross. Can you get it on a whole new level, being saved by the cross? For me, it's just genius. It's going to be a new chapter in my next book. And it told me why I intuitively always loved Paul. That he does get this. And that's what he said. Why he says, when I'm weak is when I'm strong. That's the heart of his philosophy. When I'm weak is when I'm strong. That's mysticism instead of moralism. I'm going to go back to my Franciscan roots again. The course online right now is the man I mentioned, I think, in the first lecture, St. Bonaventure. Bonaventure is probably not a name familiar to most of you. He never got the press that Thomas Aquinas got. The Dominican sort of took over, and he was canonized earlier. But when you read Bonaventure's mystical writings, you have to search for a moralistic line, and it's all cosmology, great chain of being. He says a few years before he dies, my entire teaching is summed up in emanation, everything emanates from God, exemplarism, everything exemplifies God at a different level, and consummation, everything returns to God. There's the Alpha and the Omega. It frankly is a belief in universal salvation. And we can't say that very loud because that would be condemned. But that God has come to save us all by grace. The mystic has no trouble surrendering to that. The moralist, which is most of the church, I'm afraid, all of our churches, first half of life, the moralist will not only not get it, they will aggressively fight it. Because if they let go of their world of quid pro quo, you get what you deserve. Evil people must be punished. They must be. I take delight in knowing they're going to burn in hell. And like I love to say, how could Jesus teach us unconditional love, and then God himself is not unconditional love? How could Jesus teach us to forgive 70 times 7, but God doesn't? Do you understand? How could Jesus tell us to love our enemies, but God burns them for all eternity? The whole thing falls apart at the moralistic level. It doesn't work. It's not good news anymore. It's not gospel. It's not transformative. You don't fall in love with someone who's threatening you with hellfire for all eternity if you don't love them. The example, I usually move it to the human level. All of you went on a date as a young person, I'm sure. And I know this is a caricature, but I love to say it. If at the end of your first date, the girl or the guy said, if you don't date me again, I will stalk you, I will make your life miserable, and I will burn you in hell would you go on a second date? Of course you wouldn't. That's what's happened to so much Christianity. They don't go to the mystical level, because who wants to be for all eternity with someone like that? God was made very unattractive. A moralistic God is not a God you want to gaze at for all eternity. Only total love. And for Bonaventure and the whole early Franciscan school, he doesn't begin his systematic theology with De Deo Uno, the one God. He begins with De Deo Trino. It's all Trinitarian, all Trinitarian. And he says, God is a fountain fullness of outflowing love, only flowing in one direction, always and forever. It only goes forward. It cannot go backward. There is no wrath in God. There's no anger in God. There is only outpouring love. Now that's mystical Christianity, which I believe is where all the mystics end up. But if you don't get there, my experience is you will settle for not just moralism, but cheap moralism. And Pope Francis just exposed that in his famous interview recently, where he says, when will we stop obsessing? And you know the three he mentions: contraception, abortion, and homosexuality or gay marriage. And he used the word that many of us have been afraid to use, but now a pope said it, you know? It's obsessing. You will obsess about moralism if you don't get to the mystical level. You almost become more anal retentive the older you get. When you haven't experienced God yet, it's not joyful yet, it's not a wedding banquet, it's not happiness. You get more desperate, more impatient, and you try to, give me some more laws to obey. I remember some people who were going to 3 masses a day. In desperate, more masses will do it, you know? And very legalistic about attending those masses properly. Do you understand? You get more legalistic, ritualistic, formalistic. This is not the goal. So maybe I'm making a caricature, I'm sure I am. But I want to distinguish the moralistic counterfeit of religion, which takes form in every religion, not just Christianity. Maybe it's easier, to be quite honest, for us to see it in Islam today, right? Suicide bombers and no speaking up against jihad by high-level leaders. Well, my God, this is not high-level religion, and I'm free to say that. That's not anti-Islam. I just spoke anti-Christianity at the lower levels. It always will get moralistic, and when you get moralistic, it's not long before you get violent. There's just a very small step, because when you're sure you are higher moral ground than other people, it's very quick that you have right to torture them, exclude them, punish them, kill them, and as Jesus says in John's Gospel, and when you do it, you will think you are doing a holy duty for God. Yeah. So we got to say this strongly, because we're dealing with a lot of low-level religion in all the world religions. And there is low-level Buddhism, too. The only people who don't know that are those who are not involved in Buddhism. Buddhist monks can be just as sexually depraved as Catholic priests, you know. It doesn't matter what religion you are. If you don't grow up, you will misuse religion for your own purposes. One final note. The mind that emerges from from mystical experience or second half of life maturity is what I call the contemplative mind. You don't calculate life, you contemplate life. And that's a whole different set of eyes. So that's why we largely teach contemplation here. Because if you want to find a way to grease the wheels to second half of life consciousness, to the mystical level, beyond the moralistic level, the best way is contemplation. The true contemplative, I'm going to make an absolute statement. The true contemplative is never moralistic. It's not in your worldview anymore. Do you understand? Because the ego isn't trying to achieve higher moral ground. That's it, in a word. So, let me stop at that.
It was good to hear some of, all of what you said, but some of the points in particular. It seems to me, and maybe I'm being cynical, it seems to me that this moralistic view, especially in that by the hierarchy, has been a way of easy control. And I think, I think they've embraced that, and we have a whole generation or more who seem to feast at that, and I think use it as a method of control and don't want people to move beyond that.
It keeps, they don't know they're doing that. Remember I said evil always comes from unconsciousness. They're not conscious themselves. But that level of ministry really isn't ministry at all to begin with. It's an attempt to make you codependent upon their ministrations. They don't know they're doing that. But to use a very secular term, it has to do with job security. Right? If we want to keep you coming back, we create a system that keeps you shamed, guilt-based, and needing my ministrations for absolution. Do you understand?
Well, absolutely. In my profession, I assured myself it was job security. The more people I sent to prison, the more I knew would be coming back through the system. So I never lacked for work.
You were in the legal?
Yeah, I was a judge for a long time, for 30 years. And, we do nothing, as you said, I think, in our opening session, we do nothing in our penal system to rehabilitate and restore. We merely punish. And that is the surest guarantee of recidivism.
That's right. You got it. Then you would be in a unique position to understand what I said about the law, how the law really cannot achieve restorative justice. No.
It's not in the nature of the system.
Not in the nature of it. That's what Paul is saying in Romans and Galatians. It'll give you just a whole new window to appreciate his genius, really. Because he is a religious genius, whoever this man Paul was.
But effectively, you're arguing, I think this is very true in an Eastern Christian context, that the destiny of every Christian is to be a mystic. Now that seems so implausible that we tend to put it off to the next life. But I have a notion of how, jokingly, I'm not joking, I'll tell people I set out to be a mystic and then I got ordained. Just the sheer busyness of the job rendered it nearly impossible. I can see individuals, I can see small groups of people coming together to enter into that kind of unitive consciousness, and then I can see that having effect in action. How in the world do you make it a bigger phenomenon? Now, you got great leaders like Francis who may be doing that, but
I can see why you'd say that.
How do you do that here?
Let's try the word experiential, first of all. When I say mystical, I mean experiential. That it is possible, if we get out of this realm of law and doctrine, I think most people have God experience, but there's no one there to tell them that you just had it. You just had it. We've made it a churchy thing, as we ministers well know, that you've had it when you're around candlesticks and vestments. And this is why we get back to this need for spiritual directors, I think. Wise people who can say, that moment of communion you had with your little baby while you were breastfeeding today, that's it. That moment of absolutely enjoying the little wildflower and feeling just this jerk of joy in your heart, that's it. We need to unchurchify the gospel. It's just too dang churchified. And so people are having religious experience and don't know it.
So tragic.
Tragic is the word.
It's so tragic.
Yeah.
Because we know this, there's an incredible wealth of living waiting for folks.
Yes.
And so the consequence of this tradition, the Christian tradition as it has been, is to deny people of that in their own lives.
Well, part of it isn't that, can we make church into helping them identify God in their everyday lives?
In their everyday
In other words,
Yeah.
rather than coming to church and saying, this is special, this is different,
right.
saying, this is where I can talk to you about how your everyday life is an experience of God.
Well, we all know congregations where that's real, don't you? I do.
Oh, yeah, I do too. Yeah.
That, you know, we're not talking about something that's entirely missing, but I have the good fortune of being a member of a congregation where that is exactly what happens.
That wonderful.
And yeah.
You know, when I went to the Orient, and I sat for hours in temples in India and Thailand and Japan, and you saw they're open 7 days a week, and there's people moving in and out of them all day, every day, nonstop. And we reserved this little Sunday morning slot, you know. We were just right there compartmentalizing life, you know. And admittedly, bhakti yoga, you know, these simple ladies coming in and gracefully pouring oil and lighting candles and bowing. And of course, we Christians, well, what pagan worship? I don't know. Yeah, exactly. That they've learned to honor the moment, the ordinary moment. The temples never close. That's a different notion of religiosity that we have.
Well, it's even different than the churches in Italy. Catholic churches
Yeah.
are open.
Catholic
in the
churches
United
in Italy.
States, we lock our
Lock,
churches
yeah.
except for when
Yeah.
we're having services.
Yeah.
Well, don't you think that takes the burden off of the preachers? First of all, I think they should be called teachers. And the churches are open all this time because that insinuates or implies you could have this experience at any moment.
There you go.
And it can be separate from the priest, the rabbi, or the preacher.
Clearly.
You know, they don't have to be present, nor do they have to teach you how to. I think maybe our role needs to be have this openness so they can experience
Sure.
it. And then when they do, where do they want to be? They want to go to a church that's open 24/7.
The older traditions, Orthodox and Catholics, we put the minister in between the person.
Exactly.
The Protestants thought they were reforming that, and in part they did, but they put the book in between experience, and everything became fighting about the book and preaching on the book, and the substituting of words for reality. So it became the same problem. While talking about the priesthood of all believers, it was believing in a book and arguing about a book.
Well, I'm a huge believer in the importance of vocabulary. And so just like when we were talking about eco-spirituality and getting back to nature, you don't have to get back to nature because nature is here.
There you go.
And we have to remember that all of us here, this is church. This
Two or
is church.
three gathered
It's
in my
not a
name.
building. There is a building, and we do call it a church. But this is church. And I think this is the important part. When you have those experiences to share, it's not that you're going to a place. It's that you're going to church, to your community. And I think it's so important that you have a community where you can share those experiences. People who can hold you accountable. People who can help you, and I hate the terminology, but unwrap the experience.
Sure,
And help
sure.
you understand that what you did have was a mystical
Was worth
experience.
looking
And that's very gray. It's not the black and white moralism or legalism. It's this gray
Sure.
area, especially when we're talking about church and trying to define church.
It basically trains you in much more subtle consciousness, a higher degree of subtlety. Whereas with our church, check mark, I was baptized, check mark, first communion, check mark, confirmation, doesn't mean you had a second of unitive experience.
And if you did have a second of that experience, that's probably not when it happened.
I know, yeah. Does that mean we shouldn't do it? Well, it's worth conversation. We better have conversations about when we do it, how we do it, how much importance we give to it.
Well, and so much of it, I think, is not about the person who's receiving the sacrament, but more about the community.
That's right.
And what
That's right.
what their responsibilities are to that person.
And I agree with Jennifer in the strength of community, because if I'm out in the forest and I'm worshiping in the forest, I am aware of the presence of, the bountiful nature of God. But I can't, and I hate to keep going back to the food pantry, but I cannot feed, 40 people, whereas a sense of community,
Sure.
Mrs. Jones is in the hospital suffering from, a heart attack or something. So there's a sense of community. You can do more, I think, on a broader scale. So yeah, is there a need for that physical church? Yeah, there is.
Let me just affirm that in a way so I'm not just saying the nice thing. We've done this men's work since, didn't your husband do it? Yeah, he was initiated. We've initiated about 6,000 men worldwide now, and they all say it changed their life. They'll never be the same. It was wonderful. It was the best thing that ever happened. Only those who join a small group afterwards, is there any fruit a year later? So just, if there isn't community holding you accountable to what you say you've experienced, helping you unpackage your experience, it doesn't go anywhere. So I'm glad you're saying this, because I could be heard in an individualistic way. Do you understand? I'm just telling you all to go and get enlightened and pray. It doesn't go anywhere. We're social beings. And unless I let your holiness rub off on me, I don't know my own, or I don't experience my own. So ditto, 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 ditto. Without community. So I've been saying for years that I think it's only in Matthew's gospel, but where he says, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am. A total promise of presence. Just as strong as in the bread or the wine, I am there. So just as, this is church right here. We're in church. If that's our definition of church. No candlesticks in sight, no vested priest in sight. Oh my, it's almost too simple. No. What happens in what I'm calling the second half of life, or the mystical or the contemplative level, which is adult Christianity, that's all it is that you stop counting, and you said almost exactly that. You stop counting and you let God stop counting too. The whole counting game is over. That's egocentric. That's the ego counts. The soul experiences. You see, it lets it be and learns from it. But it doesn't weigh and measure and I'm higher, you're higher, I deserve this. We see it in our own American culture, what we call this sense of entitlement, which you just get so embarrassed at, what people think they deserve and have a right to. The sense of entitlement creates a very unlikable kind of person. I don't know what else to say, Unlikable. I think we worried about it in our young kids. It's not even their fault. They grow up in an entirely entitled society. And so they really do think they deserve it, The world of grace, the world of the gospel, the world of mercy is the opposite of entitlement. It's all gratitude and confidence. The confidence given by God's gratuitous choice and love to use you as an instrument, to indwell in you as he does everybody else too. And once you realize that the gospel is a great leveling of the playing field, that all of us equally carry that divine image, all you can do is give thanks, because it's totally undeserved, it has nothing to do with you. It's gift, 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 gift. But it ironically gives you this immense self-confidence that I don't need to prove myself. I'm already validated at the deepest inner level. I don't need to be rich. I don't need to be famous. I don't need to be good looking. I don't need to think that I'm better than you. Why would I want that? I don't need that anymore. The need itself is taken away. So if you can just notice in your own ruminations, in your own mind and emotions, whenever you're counting, or thinking God is counting, at that moment, you're not there. All right, this is not where you want to be. It's a waste of time, which is finally self-defeating. That's all law can do. That's all even a good judge can do. So you were trained in it. And for you to, even with that kind of background, to move beyond it is all the more amazing, And we clergy are trained to do it. We really are, because organized religion has to organize the whole thing. And when you organize something, you create membership requirements. You inherently do. When religion is a belonging system, there have to be organizational membership requirements, conscious or unconscious, which means you're back into counting. You're back into counting. So it's only the grace of God that can free us from the burden of counting. And I hope in a certain way, starting with the atonement theory, our first one, all 5 of these beautifully gracious conversations I've been able to have with you are each in their own way about not counting anymore. And ironically, counting on another level inherently. So work with that if that helps.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this final session featuring Richard Rohr. I've loved it, not just because I've had a few weeks off, so I haven't had to speak, which, by the way, I want to thank you for your patience with. This COVID-19 season has been especially taxing on me compared to other seasons of my ministry because of my community involvement and time that takes. And so I appreciate your patience with that. I had hoped that I would have time to do more research and study, read those books I was hoping to get to. Nope. It's because I'm so dang busy doing all this other stuff. It's been very difficult to do that. We'll get to that. I am looking forward to starting a series when we get back together on the book of Colossians that Paul teaches this book of Colossians on. It'll be great. I'm looking forward to it. It'll be fun. I'll be ready for that. But unfortunately, this has just been a nuts time for me. Good time. I'm privileged and proud to be able to represent CrossWalk with so many different community leaders, but it's been rough. So thank you for your patience with Rohr. I hope you found him provocative and refreshing. I know I have. We've had great discussions on my Wednesday groups, and I invite you to get in on those. I've got a special guest that I want to introduce you to next week that I think you're really going to enjoy. Just will blow your mind. It's so good. So look forward to that next week. But for now, let's close our time as we have with the Lord's Prayer. Would you pray it with me? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Have a great week, everybody. We'll see you back here next week. Thanks a lot.